My husband and his friends thought it'd be funny to leave me stranded in a small Italian town after I caught him texting another woman. Let's see how the princess handles herself. They laughed, speeding away. I never came home. 6 months later, when Damien tracked me down, I was signing the deed to a 15th century villa. The woman he'd abandoned was gone forever. The cobblestones of Montecroce's main piazza gleamed wet from the afternoon rain. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As I stood there watching the taillights of our rental BMW disappear around the medieval corner, my husband Damien's laughter still echoed off the ancient stone walls, mingling with the cruel chuckles of his college friends, Jay, Stefan, and Sal, men in their 40s, acting like fraternity boys on their annual reunion trip. Just 20 minutes earlier, we'd been sitting at Café Luna, the charming establishment overlooking the Tuscan Valley, where I'd been trying to salvage what was supposed to be our romantic anniversary getaway. That's when Damien's phone had buzzed for the 15th time that afternoon. I'd caught a glimpse of the screen before he could hide it. Missing you already. Can't wait for tonight. Sonia. Who's Sonia? I'd asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The color had drained from Damien's face before quickly being replaced by that defensive anger I'd grown to recognize over our 12 years of marriage. She's nobody, Alicia. Just a client. Clients don't send kiss emojis, Damien. His friends had grown uncomfortable, exchanging glances across the wrought iron table. Jay had cleared his throat. Maybe we should head back to the hotel, but I couldn't let it go. Not this time. Not after months of late nights at the office, mysterious phone calls that ended when I entered the room, and a growing distance between us that I'd foolishly attributed to work stress. Show me the conversation, I'd demanded. That's when Damien's mask had slipped completely. You know what, Alicia? I'm sick of your paranoia. I'm sick of your constant suspicions. We're supposed to be celebrating our anniversary, and you're acting like some jealous housewife. The words had stung, especially delivered in front of his friends who'd always treated me like an outsider during these trips. I was the wife who was tolerated, not welcomed. The woman who cramped their style and reminded them of their own domestic responsibilities. I'm not being paranoid, I'd shot back, my voice rising. I'm being observant. There's a difference. Damien had slammed his espresso cup down so hard that the saucer cracked. Fine. You want to do this here? In front of everyone? You're embarrassing yourself, Alicia. The fight had escalated quickly after that, voices rising as 12 years of suppressed resentments bubbled to the surface. I'd accused him of growing distant, of treating me like hired help rather than a partner. He'd countered by calling me needy and controlling, claiming I'd suffocated him with my expectations of a perfect marriage. His friends had sat in uncomfortable silence, until Stefan finally suggested they leave. Let's go back to the hotel, and let you two work this out, he'd said diplomatically. I'd stood up first, dignity my only remaining armor. I need some air. I'll walk back. That's when Damien had made his fateful decision. Actually, why don't you take some time to think about your behavior? His tone had turned cold, calculating. Maybe a little independence will help you appreciate what you have. I'd assumed he meant I should walk back to our hotel while they drove. It wasn't until they'd all piled into the car, and Damien had rolled down the window, that I'd understood the true scope of his cruelty. Your purse has your passport, right? He'd called out, that smirk I'd once found charming now twisted into something ugly. Good. Figure out how to get home, princess. Maybe it'll teach you some humility. The car had roared to life, and my husband of 12 years had driven away, leaving me standing in a town whose name I could barely pronounce, in a country where I spoke perhaps 20 words of the language. Now, as the reality of my situation sank in, I fumbled for my phone with trembling hands. 17 missed calls, all going straight to voicemail. Text messages marked as delivered, but ignored. I tried Jay, then Stefan, then Sal. Every single one of Damien's friends had blocked my number. The cruelty of it took my breath away. This hadn't been a moment of drunken stupidity or heated anger. They'd planned this, discussed it, coordinated their response to ensure I couldn't reach any of them for help. I checked my wallet with growing panic. €127, and about $80 in cash. My credit cards were all joint accounts that Damien monitored obsessively, always questioning my purchases, always making me justify my spending. He'd called it financial responsibility, but I now saw it for what it really was: control. The medieval town of Montecrosas spread around me like something from a fairy tale, all honey-colored stone and terracotta roofs, cypress trees dotting the rolling hills beyond. Tourists wandered the narrow streets, cameras clicking, their laughter a stark contrast to my growing panic. What had seemed picturesque an hour ago now felt like a beautiful prison. I approached the cafe where we'd just fought, hoping the owner might speak English. The elderly man behind the counter, who'd served us our coffee with such warmth, looked at me with concern when he saw my distressed expression. "Il marito?" he asked gently. "Husband," I nodded, tears threatening to spill over. "Gone, left me." His weathered face softened with understanding. "Ah, trouble. You need help, yes?" For the first time since being abandoned, I felt a spark of hope. This stranger, who owed me nothing, was offering assistance while my own husband had left me stranded like unwanted luggage. As I struggled to explain my situation through a combination of broken Italian English and desperate gestures, a thought crystallized in my mind. Damien had expected me to panic, to call my parents in Boston begging for rescue, to come crawling back grateful for his forgiveness. But standing in this ancient town, watching the kindness of a stranger unfold before me, I felt something unexpected stirring in my chest. Not just anger at Damien's betrayal, but curiosity about what might happen if I didn't follow his script. What if I didn't come running home? What if the woman he'd abandoned in Montecrosa wasn't the same woman who eventually returned? The cafe owner was already reaching for his phone, presumably to call someone who could help translate. But as I looked around at the timeless beauty surrounding me, at the genuine concern in a stranger's eyes, I realized something profound. For the first time in 12 years, I was about to make a decision entirely my own. The elderly cafe owner, who introduced himself as Giuseppe, led me to a small table in the back corner of his establishment. His wife, Matilda, emerged from the kitchen, a woman with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun and eyes that held decades of wisdom. She took one look at my tear-stained face and immediately began fussing over me in rapid Italian, bringing fresh espresso and a plate of biscotti despite my protests. Giuseppe had called his grandson Marco, a university student studying English, who arrived within minutes on a bright red Vespa. Through Marco's translation, I managed to explain my situation: American tourist, abandoned by husband, limited money, no way to contact anyone who might help. "Your husband," Marco said carefully after translating my story to his grandparents. "He take your passport?" "No, I have it." I patted my purse, grateful that Damien's cruelty hadn't extended quite that far. "But he has all our cards, our hotel reservation, our return flights. Everything was under his name." Matilda spoke rapidly to Marco, her voice rising with what sounded like indignation. Marco nodded, then turned back to me. "Nonna says this is molto brutto, very ugly behavior. She says you stay tonight at their house. Tomorrow we help you figure out what to do." The kindness of these strangers, who'd known me for all of an hour, stood in stark contrast to my husband's calculated abandonment. Giuseppe refused to let me pay for the coffee, waving away my euros with gentle insistence. Matilda packed leftovers from the cafe's kitchen into a bag, pressing it into my hands despite my protests. Their home sat on a narrow street just off the main piazza, a 3-story stone building that had been in Giuseppe's family for 6 generations. The guest room was simple but charming: exposed wooden beams, a single bed with a handmade quilt, and a window that looked out over rooftops toward the valley beyond. As Matilda showed me where to find towels and soap, I caught sight of myself in the antique mirror above the wash basin. The woman staring back looked hollow-eyed and shaken, her carefully styled hair disheveled from running her hands through it in stress. This was supposed to be our anniversary trip, 12 years of marriage celebrated in one of the world's most romantic countries. Instead, I was alone in a stranger's home, abandoned like a piece of unwanted luggage. That night, I sat on the narrow bed and tried to make sense of my situation. I powered up my phone, hoping against hope that Damien might have come to his senses. that there might be an apologetic message explaining this had all been a terrible mistake. Instead, I found something that made my blood run cold. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. While scrolling through our shared cloud storage to find important phone numbers, I discovered a folder I'd never seen before. Set them personal. My finger hovered over it for a long moment before curiosity overcame my fear. The folder contained dozens of photos and text message screenshots. Photos of Damien with a beautiful brunette, Sonia presumably, taken in restaurants I recognized, at events I thought he'd attended for work. Screenshots of conversations going back months, filled with intimate messages and plans for secret meetings. Can't wait until Alicia's trip to her sister's next week, read one from 2 months ago. We'll have the whole weekend. My sister's trip, I'd flown to Seattle to help with her newborn, leaving Damien alone for 4 days. He'd been so supportive, so understanding about the timing, all while planning to spend those days with his mistress. Another message, from just 3 weeks ago. The Italy trip is perfect timing. After this anniversary charade, I'll have grounds to ask for the divorce. She's been so clingy lately, it'll be easy to make her look unstable. Anniversary charade. The words hit me like a physical blow. This entire trip, the romantic hotel, the carefully planned itinerary through Tuscany, had been orchestrated as ammunition for a divorce he was already planning. And today's abandonment wasn't a cruel prank, it was a calculated setup. I scrolled further, finding detailed discussions about their future together. Sonia worked at his architecture firm, the client he'd mentioned countless times over the past year. She was 28 to my 36, single, ambitious, and completely unencumbered by the domestic expectations that Damien apparently found so suffocating in our marriage. The messages revealed their entire strategy: make me appear unstable and controlling, document instances of what they could frame as unreasonable behavior, then use the divorce to leave me with minimal assets. The prenup we'd signed 12 years ago had seemed reasonable then. We'd both been young professionals with modest savings. Now with Damien's successful firm and our joint real estate investments, it would leave me with almost nothing. But most devastating was a message from just yesterday: Phase 1 complete. She took the bait perfectly at dinner, got all paranoid and possessive just like we knew she would. Tomorrow I strand her in that little hill town, get it all on video, and we'll have perfect evidence of her mental breakdown. My lawyers say the abandonment will look like self-defense if she seems unhinged enough. Video. I remembered Stefan holding up his phone during our argument, claiming he was checking messages, but he'd been recording everything, documenting my reactions to Damien's psychological manipulation. My hands shook as I set the phone aside. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a comprehensive plan to destroy my life, orchestrated by the man who'd promised to love and protect me. Every argument we'd had recently, every moment I'd felt confused by his changing behavior, had been carefully designed to push me toward this breaking point. Giuseppe's voice drifted up from downstairs, speaking softly to Matilda in Italian. The warmth and genuine affection in his tone reminded me what real partnership sounded like, something I'd forgotten existed. For the first time since discovering the photos, I felt something other than devastation. Anger began to kindle in my chest, not the explosive rage of betrayal, but something colder and more determined. Damien thought he'd won. He expected me to come crawling home, broken and grateful for whatever scraps of dignity he'd allow me to keep. His plan depended on my predictable compliance, my learned helplessness, my fear of being alone. But as I listened to the gentle voices of two people who'd shown me more genuine kindness in one afternoon than my husband had in months, I realized something that would change everything. I didn't want to go home. The next morning brought harsh sunlight, streaming through the ancient windows, and the sobering reality of my situation. Giuseppe had left early for the cafe, but Matilda insisted on preparing breakfast, fresh bread, local honey and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Despite her kindness, I could see the concern in her weathered eyes as she watched me pick at the food. Marco arrived just after 9, his English textbooks tucked under one arm. "Nana called me," he explained, settling at the kitchen table. "She wants to help you contact your embassy, maybe arrange travel home." The assumption that I wanted to go home hung in the air. It was the logical next step. the expected response to my situation. Call the American consulate, wire money from family, book the first flight back to Boston, where I could begin the humiliating process of explaining to everyone how my marriage had imploded so spectacularly. Actually, I said slowly, I need to make some calls first, figure out exactly what I'm dealing with. My first call was to our joint bank account's customer service line. The automated system cheerfully informed me that our checking account had been frozen due to unusual activity, and our savings had been transferred to an account requiring dual authorization for any withdrawals. Damien had moved fast. The credit card company delivered equally devastating news. All cards had been reported as potentially compromised and were temporarily suspended pending verification. When I tried to verify my identity, I discovered that Damien had changed the security questions on our accounts sometime in the past month. This is impossible, I told the representative. This is my account too. I've been using these cards for 12 years. I understand your frustration, ma'am, but without the proper verification answers, or the primary account holder's authorization, I cannot reactivate the cards. You'll need to visit a branch office with proper identification. The nearest branch office was in Florence, an hour away by train, if I could afford the ticket. My next call was to our house phone in Boston. It rang and rang before going to voicemail, a new message in Damien's voice. You've reached the Davis residence. We're currently traveling abroad. For urgent matters regarding Davis Architectural, please contact our main office. The casual "we" in his message felt like another slap. He was already rewriting our story, erasing my individual existence from our shared life. Desperation drove me to call my college roommate Sarah, one of the few friends I'd maintained despite Damien's subtle discouragement of my social connections over the years. Alicia, oh my God, I was just thinking about you. How's the anniversary trip? Sarah's voice was bright with genuine warmth. I broke down completely, the whole story spilling out between sobs. Sarah listened in horrified silence as I described the abandonment, the photos, the frozen accounts. Jesus Christ, Alicia, this isn't just cheating, this is financial abuse. You need to get home immediately. I can wire you money for a flight. I can't ask you to. You're not asking, I'm offering. How much do you need? I should have said yes immediately. Sarah was offering me exactly what I needed, a way home, a chance to start fighting back from familiar ground with proper legal representation. But something held me back. Sarah, can I ask you something? When was the last time you heard from me? Really heard from me, not just those Christmas cards or brief texts. There was a pause. Honestly, it's been months, maybe longer. I kept meaning to call, but you know how life gets. No, it's not your fault. Damien, he didn't like me maintaining friendships. Said it took time away from our marriage, that I was always complaining about him to other people. I stopped reaching out because it was easier than fighting about it. The admission hung between us, highlighting how thoroughly I'd been isolated. Sarah was my closest remaining friend, and we barely spoke anymore. Alicia, that's textbook manipulation. You need to come home and get proper help. A good lawyer, a therapist, people who can help you rebuild. After we hung up with Sarah's promise to wire emergency funds, if I needed them, I sat in Giuseppe's garden, surrounded by olive trees and the distant sound of church bells. Marco had given me space to make my calls, but I could see him through the kitchen window, occasionally glancing my way with obvious concern. The logical path forward was clear: accept Sarah's help, fly home, file for divorce, and begin the long process of rebuilding my life in Boston. I'd find a small apartment, restart my dormant interior design career, reconnect with the few friends who remained. But as I imagined that future, all I could see was a gray landscape of starting over from scratch at 36, explaining to everyone how I'd been so thoroughly duped, living constantly under the shadow of my failure to see Damien's true nature. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop being dramatic. This has gone on long enough. I'm at the hotel waiting for you. We can discuss your behavior like adults. The audacity of it took my breath away. He'd frozen our accounts, abandoned me with no resources, orchestrated months of psychological manipulation, and now he was positioning himself as the reasonable party waiting for me to come crawling back. I typed and deleted a dozen responses before settling on something that surprised even me. I'm not coming to the hotel, I'm staying in Monte Croce. His response came immediately, Don't be ridiculous. You don't even speak Italian. How long do you think you can survive on charity from strangers? The question was meant to highlight my helplessness, to force me to confront my dependence on him. But as I looked around at the ancient town that had welcomed me, at the kindness Giuseppe and Matilda had shown without expecting anything in return, I realized something profound. I didn't want to survive on charity. I wanted to figure out how to thrive. And for the first time in 12 years, I was free to try. Damien's text hung on my phone screen like a challenge. How long do you think you can survive on charity from strangers? The question was designed to send me running back to him, tail between my legs, grateful for his forgiveness and financial security. A week ago it might have worked, but something had shifted in me during those 3 days of discovery. Maybe it was seeing myself through Giuseppe and Matilda's eyes, not as a burden or a failure, but as someone worthy of kindness. Maybe it was the clarity that came from finally understanding the depth of Damien's manipulation. Or maybe it was simply that I'd hit rock bottom so hard that the only direction left was up. I walked back into the house where Marco was helping his grandmother prepare lunch, their easy conversation in Italian, creating a warm domestic symphony I'd forgotten could exist. In my marriage, meals had become silent affairs, or opportunities for Damien to critique my cooking, my conversation, my very presence at his table. "Marco," I said, interrupting their flow, "I need to ask you something important. Is there a way for me to stay in Italy legally? Not just as a tourist, but actually stay?" Both he and Matilda stopped what they were doing. Marco's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "You want to immigrate to Italy?"
But
"Your life in America." "What life?" The question came out more bitter than I'd intended. "My husband has made sure I have no access to our money, our home, or our business. He's been planning this divorce for months, setting me up to look unstable so he can leave me with nothing. I could go home and fight him in court, spending whatever money I can scrape together on lawyers while living in some tiny apartment, watching him parade his mistress around our old social circle. I moved to the window overlooking the medieval streets, where locals were setting up for the afternoon market. Or, I could stay somewhere that I'm starting to understand might actually want me." Matilda spoke rapidly to Marco, her voice animated. He nodded several times before turning back to me. "Nona says you have skills, yes? You worked before marriage? Interior design. I had my own small firm before I married Damien. Nothing huge, but I was good at it." The words felt rusty in my mouth. I hadn't talked about my career as anything other than a past hobby in years. "And you have money saved somewhere? Even a little?" I thought about my secret account, the one Damien didn't know about. Years ago, my grandmother had left me a modest inheritance that I'd quietly deposited in a separate bank, some instinct telling me to keep it private. It wasn't much, maybe $15,000, but it was mine alone. Some, not a lot, but some. Marco translated this exchange to his grandmother, whose eyes lit up with something that looked like excitement. She spoke again, gesturing toward the window and then to me. "She says there's a building here in town, very old, that's been for sale for 2 years. Nobody wants it because it needs much work, but the price keeps dropping. She thinks maybe you could look at it." My heart began to race. What kind of building? A villa. Small one, maybe from the 15th century. It was owned by a family in Rome who wanted to make it a vacation home, but they never came. Now they just want to sell. The idea was insane. I was a woman who'd been abandoned 3 days ago, who had limited language skills and no real understanding of Italian bureaucracy. But as Marco explained the basics of EU residency through investment, something crystallized in my mind. Damien expected me to come crawling back. His entire plan depended on my predictable helplessness, my fear of the unknown, my inability to imagine a life without his structure and control. Every text he'd sent reinforced this assumption that I was too dependent, too fragile, too scared to make it alone. What if he was wrong? "I want to see it," I said. Marco's eyes widened. "The villa? But Signora, this is a very big decision." "Everything is a big decision now," I interrupted. "Going home is a big decision. Staying is a big decision. Fighting Damien in American courts is a big decision. At least this way, I'm making the choice instead of just reacting to his choices. An hour later, we stood before a narrow 3-story building tucked into a side street near the town's ancient walls. The realtor, a sharp-eyed woman named Francesca, who spoke excellent English, unlocked the heavy wooden door with obvious skepticism about this sudden American buyer. The villa was a disaster. Water damage had stained the plaster walls, tiles were missing from the floors, and the kitchen looked like it hadn't been updated since the Renaissance. But the bones of the building were solid: thick stone walls, high ceilings with exposed beams, and windows that offered glimpses of the valley beyond. The price includes all furnishings, Francesca explained, gesturing to the mix of antique and broken furniture scattered throughout the rooms. The owners want a quick sale. They've dropped the asking price 3 times. The current price was exactly what I had in my secret account, plus enough left over for basic renovations. It was fate or madness, possibly both. As we climbed to the 3rd floor, I found myself imagining the space transformed, walls painted in warm colors, modern amenities blended respectfully with historical details, rooms that breathed with life instead of decay. My designer's eye automatically began calculating possibilities, seeing past the damage to the potential beneath. "I'll take it," I said. Francesca nearly dropped her folder. "Signora, perhaps you should think. I've been thinking for 3 days straight. This is the first decision that feels right." My phone buzzed with another text from Damien. "I'm giving you until tomorrow morning. After that, I'm flying back to Boston and you can figure out your own way home." I looked at his message, then at the villa around me, broken but beautiful, abandoned but full of possibility. Then I typed back, "Don't wait for me, I'm not coming home." The real choice wasn't between Damien and independence. It was between fear and possibility. I chose possibility. The paperwork for purchasing property in Italy, as an American citizen, turned out to be more complex than anyone had anticipated. What I'd assumed would be a simple transaction became a 3-week odyssey through Italian bureaucracy that tested every ounce of determination I possessed. Francesca introduced me to a lawyer named Avvocato Benedetti, a patient man in his 60s who spoke precise English and seemed genuinely invested in helping me navigate the legal maze. "Signora Davis," he explained during our first meeting, "buying property gives you certain residency rights, but the process requires many documents, many stamps, many appointments. Each day brought a new requirement: birth certificate translations, proof of funds letters, tax identification numbers, bank statements verified by 3 different offices." I spent hours in government buildings, learning to decipher forms in Italian, while clutching my pocket dictionary like a lifeline. Giuseppe and Matilda became my anchors during this uncertain time. Each evening, I'd return to their home exhausted from bureaucratic battles, and Matilda would have dinner waiting, simple pasta dishes that somehow tasted better than any expensive restaurant meal I'd shared with Damien. Giuseppe would pour wine and ask about my day in his careful English, celebrating each small victory as if it were his own. "Today the building permits office," I'd report, and he'd nod approvingly. Benny. "Tomorrow?" "Tax office in Siena," I'd reply, and he'd immediately begin planning the best route, the best time to arrive, which train to take. Their investment in my success felt more genuine than anything I'd experienced in years of marriage. These relative strangers were actively helping me build a new life, while my husband of 12 years had systematically worked to tear down my old one. During the 2nd week, while waiting for property inspections to be completed, I finally accessed my secret bank account and transferred the funds to an Italian bank that Benedetti had recommended. Watching my grandmother's inheritance convert to euros felt like crossing a bridge I could never uncross. My phone had been largely silent since that final exchange with Damien, but social media told a different story. Sarah had been sending me screenshots of posts from our mutual friends, carefully cropped photos of Damien at Boston social events, looking appropriately devastated and accepting sympathy for his troubled wife, who'd had a breakdown during their anniversary trip. The narrative he was crafting painted me as unstable, someone who'd abandoned their marriage during a moment of mental crisis. Friends were commenting with supportive messages, So sorry for what you're going through, and hope Alicia gets the help she needs. Meanwhile, other screenshots showed him posting from clearly expensive restaurants and events, never alone but always managing to crop out his companion. The timeline of his social media activity painted a picture of a man bravely continuing his life despite his wife's abandonment, exactly the story he needed for his divorce proceedings. He's good, I admitted to Marco one afternoon, as we reviewed translation documents. I have to give him credit. He's rewritten this whole thing so I'm the villain. Marco frowned at the screenshots I'd shown him. But surely your friends, they know you better than this. The question stung because the answer was complicated. How many of my friends really knew me anymore? Damien had gradually isolated me from close relationships, always finding reasons why my girlfriends were negative influences, or my work colleagues were just using me for connections. The few remaining friendships had become surface-level interactions, dinner parties where I played the role of successful architect's wife, rather than revealing anything real about my inner life. I think I've been invisible for longer than I realized, I told him. The property inspection revealed structural issues that required immediate attention: a leaking roof, outdated electrical systems, plumbing that belonged in a museum. Each discovery should have discouraged me, should have sent me running back to the familiar safety of American life. Instead, I found myself energized by the challenges. These problems, they can all be fixed, Benedetti assured me as we reviewed the inspector's report. But you will need contractors, permits, time, maybe 6 months to make it truly livable. 6 months. Half a year of commitment to this decision, this place, this version of myself that was still taking shape. I thought about what I'd be doing in 6 months if I'd chosen differently. Probably sitting in a Boston apartment, still fighting Damien in divorce court, still trying to rebuild a life from the ashes of his destruction. Let's do it, I said. That evening, as I signed the final purchase documents in Benedetti's office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Saw your husband at Morrison's gallery opening with a brunette, thought you should know. Claire, from yoga class. I stared at the message, remembering Morrison's gallery, a space where Damien and I had attended dozens of events together. Now he was making his relationship with Sonia public, confident that I was too broken and distant to interfere with his narrative. I deleted the message without responding, and handed the signed papers to Benedetti. The villa was mine. Moving into the villa was like stepping into a beautiful ruin. The keys felt heavy in my hand as I unlocked the ancient wooden door for the first time as owner, Giuseppe and Marco flanking me with boxes of basic supplies they'd insisted on providing. The reality of my decision hit me the moment we stepped inside. The August heat had turned the interior into an oven, and without electricity, the thick stone walls that had once seemed charming now felt like a tomb. The musty smell of decades of neglect mixed with something that might have been mold, and when I tried the water tap, nothing but rust-colored sludge emerged. Madonna mia, Giuseppe muttered, crossing himself as he surveyed the damage in daylight. Marco immediately began opening shutters, trying to create cross-ventilation, but the air that entered was barely cooler than what we were trying to escape. I stood in what had once been the main living area, surrounded by water-stained walls and furniture that looked like it might collapse if touched, and felt the first wave of true panic since making this decision. What had I done? I was an interior designer, not a contractor. I could choose paint colors and arrange furniture, but I had no idea how to rewire a building or fix a roof. The scope of necessary repairs seemed to grow larger by the minute, and my modest budget suddenly felt laughably inadequate. Maybe I should find a hotel for tonight, I said weakly. Until we can get the utilities working, Giuseppe shook his head firmly. No hotel, you come home with us tonight. Tomorrow we find workers, but that night, lying in the narrow bed at Giuseppe and Matilda's house, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow on the ceiling seemed to mock my naive optimism. I'd bought a crumbling building in a country where I barely spoke the language, using every penny of my savings, with no real plan beyond some romantic notion of transformation. My phone showed 17 new messages from Sarah, growing increasingly worried about my silence. The latest read, "Alicia, please just call me. I'm starting to think maybe Damien is right about you having some kind of breakdown. This villa thing sounds crazy. Even my closest friend was beginning to doubt my sanity. Maybe they were all right. Maybe this was a breakdown. A desperate middle-aged woman making increasingly irrational decisions to avoid facing the wreckage of her real life. I stepped onto the small balcony outside the guest room, the cool night air carrying the scent of olive groves and something floral I couldn't identify. The medieval town spread below me, warm light glowing from windows, the sound of late dinner conversations drifting from nearby courtyards. It was beautiful, undeniably, but beauty didn't fix electrical systems or patch leaking roofs. Signora Alicia. Matilda's voice came softly from behind me. She stepped onto the balcony wearing a thick robe, carrying 2 cups of chamomile tea. We sat together in comfortable silence for several minutes before she spoke again, her limited English careful and deliberate. "My Sophia," she called today. "From Australia." I knew this was significant. Matilda rarely spoke about her daughter, the pain of separation too sharp even after years. She say, "How you say, scared. New baby, husband work too much, no friends there. Feel alone." Matilda paused, searching for words. I tell her, fight or fly. Some people fight same place always. Some people fly to find strength. Her weathered hand covered mine on the small balcony railing. "You fly here for reason, not accident." The simplicity of her words cut through my spiraling doubts. I hadn't come to Monte Croce seeking transformation. I'd been driven here by betrayal and abandonment. But perhaps that was exactly what made it possible. "But what if I fail?" I whispered. "What if I can't fix the villa? What if I can't make this work?" Matilda smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "What if you fly and discover you have wings?" The next morning brought unexpected salvation in the form of a weather-beaten pickup truck rumbling up the narrow street to my villa. Giuseppe emerged from the driver's seat, followed by a man I didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of deep tan that spoke of a lifetime working outdoors. "This is Salvatore," Giuseppe announced proudly. "Best builder in 3 towns. He want to see your house." Salvatore moved through the villa with the confidence of someone who understood old buildings intimately. He tested walls, examined beams, ran his hands along stonework with an almost reverent touch. His assessment was delivered in rapid Italian to Giuseppe, who translated with growing excitement. "He says the bones are very good, stone walls solid, roof needs work but not replacement. Big job, but good building underneath." Giuseppe paused dramatically. "He also says, he help you. I can't afford a full contractor." I started to protest, but Salvatore held up a weathered hand. "Partnership," he said in heavily accented English. "I help fix. You help me with what is word design. Make beautiful." He pulled out his phone, showing me photos of other restoration projects, ancient buildings transformed into stunning modern spaces while retaining their historical character. His work was exactly what my villa needed, but surely beyond my budget. "No money now," he continued. "We work together. When villa finished, we share profit when you sell. Or," he smiled, "if you stay, you pay slow, like family." Standing in my broken villa, surrounded by these people who barely knew me, but were willing to invest in my impossible dream, I felt something shift fundamentally. This wasn't charity or pity. It was partnership, community, the kind of mutual support I'd forgotten existed. For the first time since signing those papers, I believed I might actually have wings. The first week of renovation felt like being thrown into the deep end of a very foreign pool. Salvatore arrived each morning at 7 sharp with a rotating crew of local workers. His nephew Luca, who spoke decent English, an ancient electrician named Tommaso, who communicated entirely through gestures and grunts, and various specialists who appeared and disappeared based on the day's needs. I quickly discovered that my role as design partner required skills I'd never developed in my previous career. In Boston, I'd worked with clean canvases, modern apartments and suburban homes, where the biggest structural challenge was convincing clients to remove a non-load-bearing wall. Here, every design decision had to account for 5 centuries of modifications, additions and repairs that previous owners had layered onto the original structure. "This wall," Salvatore explained on day 3, pointing to what I'd assumed was a simple partition between the kitchen and dining area, "is from 1847. Behind it, original fresco. We keep. The question seemed simple until I realized it would affect plumbing routes, electrical planning, and the entire flow of the main floor. I stared at the rough plaster, trying to imagine what lay beneath, feeling the weight of responsibility for preserving something beautiful that had survived nearly 2 centuries. Can we expose it safely? I asked. Salvatore nodded approvingly. Sigh. But careful work, expensive work. Everything was expensive work. The electrical system required complete replacement, which meant threading new wiring through stone walls without damaging them. The plumbing needed updating while respecting the building's historic character. Even simple decisions like choosing light fixtures became complex negotiations between functionality, authenticity, and budget. I found myself oscillating between excitement and terror. One moment I'd be standing in what would become the master bedroom, sunlight streaming through ancient windows, imagining the space transformed into something magnificent. The next moment, I'd be staring at an estimate for roof repairs that consumed a quarter of my remaining funds, wondering if I'd made the most expensive mistake of my life. The language barrier complicated everything. While Salvatore and Luca spoke workable English, the parade of specialists who came to assess various aspects of the renovation communicated primarily in rapid Italian punctuated by dramatic gestures. I began carrying a translation app everywhere, typing frantically as electricians explained complex problems, or stonemasons described restoration techniques. You learn fast, Luca observed one afternoon, as I successfully negotiated with a tile supplier in my halting Italian, managing to secure both a discount and delivery to our narrow street. But the learning curve was steep and exhausting. Each evening, I'd return to Giuseppe and Matilda's house covered in dust, my head spinning with new vocabulary and concepts I'd never needed before. Load-bearing calculations, historic preservation requirements, building codes that varied depending on the age of different sections of the structure. The physical demands surprised me too. Unlike my previous design work, which involved mostly meetings and computer time, this project required me to be on-site constantly. I climbed ladders to examine roof damage, crawled through narrow spaces to trace plumbing routes, and spent hours on my hands and knees examining floor stones to determine which could be salvaged. My body adapted gradually. The soft hands that had once been my pride, carefully manicured for client meetings, developed calluses from handling rough materials. My complexion, protected for years by expensive skincare routines and careful sun avoidance, began to show the golden tan of someone who worked outdoors. I started wearing Giuseppe's old work shirts instead of my carefully coordinated outfits, and found them more comfortable than anything in my abandoned wardrobe. The transformation wasn't just physical. Making decisions quickly, trusting my instincts about design choices, learning to communicate through sketches and gestures when words failed, all of it was rebuilding confidence I hadn't realized I'd lost. In my marriage, every significant decision had been filtered through Damien's opinions and preferences. Here, when Salvatore asked about tile patterns or Luca wondered about cabinet placement, they waited for my answer, my choice, my vision. But the isolation was real too. Giuseppe and Matilda provided emotional support, but they couldn't understand the technical challenges I faced daily. Marco helped with translation, but he was preparing for university exams and couldn't be constantly available. Most evenings, I sat alone in the guest room, researching Italian building techniques on my laptop, feeling the gulf between my old life and this new one growing wider. Phone calls with Sarah became increasingly strained. Alicia, I'm worried about you, she'd say. You sound different, disconnected. Are you sure you're thinking clearly about all this? How could I explain that different was exactly what I wanted? That the woman who'd been abandoned in Montecroce 3 weeks ago had been suffocating for years, and this disconnection from my old life felt like breathing freely for the first time in decades. I'm fine, I'd insist, but even I could hear the uncertainty in my voice. The truth was, some days I wasn't sure I was fine. Some days, standing in my half-demolished villa surrounded by the chaos of renovation, I wondered if everyone who thought I was having a breakdown might be right. But then the sun would hit the exposed frescoes just right, or Salvatore would show me a restored beam that revealed the building's original beauty, and I'd remember why I was fighting so hard to make this impossible dream work, even if I wasn't entirely sure I could. The breakthrough came during my third week of renovation, when a sudden September thunderstorm forced all work to halt. Salvatore's crew retreated to the local bar, but I stayed in the villa, using the unexpected quiet to really examine the spaces we were transforming. Standing in what would become the kitchen, I found myself studying the exposed fresco we'd uncovered behind that 1847 wall. The painted vines and birds were faded but still vibrant, and as I traced the delicate brushstrokes with my fingertips, I realized something profound. This building had been loved by many people over 5 centuries. Each addition, each modification, each careful preservation of original details, spoke of owners who saw beyond the structure's flaws to its potential. Beautiful, yes, Salvatore's voice came from behind me. I hadn't heard him return from the bar. It's incredible. How many families do you think have lived here? He moved closer to the fresco, his weathered hands respectful as he pointed to different sections. My Nana, she knew the family who lived here in the 1920s. The Rosses. They had 7 children, very poor, but they keep the paintings safe. Before them, Merchant's family. Before that, he shrugged. Many stories in these walls. The rain drummed against the windows as we stood together in the half-finished space. Salvatore, can I ask you something? Why are you really helping me? You could make more money working for the wealthy Romans who buy vacation homes here. His expression grew thoughtful. You want true answer. I nodded. My son, he live in Milano now. Good job, good money, but no time for old father. My daughter, she marry German man, live in Berlin. They visit 1 time each year, maybe 2. He gestured around the villa. I build many houses for rich people. They come for August, maybe Easter. Houses stay empty, no life inside. But you, he paused, searching for words. You not buy house for vacation, you buy for home. The distinction hit me like a revelation. You can tell the difference. Sigh. Rich people, they buy and change everything to look like magazine. You ask me, how can we save this fresco? How can we keep this beam but make it safe? You want to belong to house, not make house belong to you. As the storm intensified, Salvatore shared stories of other restoration projects, some successful, others disasters. The disasters, he explained, almost always involved buyers who imposed their vision without listening to the building's history. The successes happened when new owners learned to work with the structure, understanding its quirks and possibilities. Building like person, he said. If you respect it, give you gifts. If you force, it fight you always. Over the following days, this philosophy began shaping every decision we made. Instead of installing modern fixtures that would clash with the medieval architecture, we spent extra time finding period-appropriate alternatives. Rather than enlarging windows for more light, we discovered strategic mirror placement could brighten rooms while preserving historical integrity. Giuseppe began stopping by each afternoon after closing the café, ostensibly to check on progress but really to share his own memories of the building. The Rossi children, they used to slide down these stairs like playground, he told me, running his hand along the worn stone banister. Marco's father, he carved his initials somewhere in the cellar when he was boy. Matilda started bringing lunch for the entire crew, transforming our work breaks into impromptu family meals. The men would sit on makeshift benches in the courtyard, sharing stories and jokes while I practiced my Italian by following their conversations. Slowly, I began to understand not just the words but the rhythms of their humor, the way they showed affection through gentle teasing and shared concern for each other's families. You understand now, Luca observed one afternoon as I successfully joined a conversation about his girlfriend's cooking without needing translation help. We not just fix building, we make family. The word family struck me unexpectedly. These people who'd known me for less than a month were treating me with more genuine care than I'd received from my own husband in years. They celebrated my small victories, successfully communicating with a supplier, choosing tiles that perfectly complemented the restored stonework, and supported me through the inevitable setbacks and frustrations. When the tile installer made a mistake that required redoing an entire bathroom floor, Salvatore found me sitting on the front steps fighting back tears of frustration and exhaustion. "Is hard," he said simply, settling beside me. "But you see bathroom yesterday? Was good before will be perfect after. Mistakes, they teach us. In America, we have a saying, I replied. Measure twice, cut once, avoid mistakes altogether. He laughed. Ah, but then how you learn to fix mistakes, how you discover sometimes mistakes make better result than plan. Looking back at the villa, with its perfect imperfections and ongoing challenges, I realized he was right. Damien would have hired the most expensive contractors, demanded perfection from the beginning, and missed the entire journey of discovery and growth that came through struggling with each problem. This wasn't just about restoring a building, it was about understanding that I belonged somewhere, that I could contribute something meaningful, that I was worth the investment of other people's time and knowledge. For the first time in years, I felt truly valuable. October brought cooler weather and a shift in the renovation's pace. The major structural work was nearing completion, which meant my role evolved from general decision-maker to hands-on craftsperson. Salvatore announced one morning that it was time for me to learn real skills, not just pointing and choosing. Today, you learn to mix lime mortar, he declared, leading me to a pile of materials in the courtyard. Original walls, they need original techniques. Lime mortar, I discovered, was an ancient art that required patience and intuition as much as technical knowledge. The proportions of lime putty, sand and water had to be adjusted based on humidity, temperature, and the specific characteristics of the stone being repaired. Too wet and the mortar would slump, too dry and it wouldn't bond properly. My first attempts were disasters. The mixture either crumbled like sand, or remained stubbornly lumpy despite vigorous stirring. Tommaso, the ancient electrician, who rarely spoke, watched my struggles with obvious amusement before finally shuffling over to demonstrate. His gnarled hands moved with surprising grace, folding the materials together in a rhythm that seemed almost meditative. When he handed me the trowel, the mortar felt completely different, smooth, cohesive, ready to work with rather than against. Is not recipe, Salvatore explained, as I practiced spreading the mortar between stones, is conversation, you feel what building needs. The physical demands of the work surprised me. My hands, once soft from office work and expensive creams, developed thick calluses. My shoulders and back ached from lifting buckets of materials and reaching into awkward spaces. But gradually, my body adapted. Muscles I'd forgotten I had grew stronger, and I found satisfaction in the honest fatigue that came from meaningful labor. Learning to point stonework, filling the gaps between stones with mortar, became my specialty. The work required steady hands and an eye for consistency, skills that translated well from my design background. Hour after hour, I would carefully remove old crumbling mortar and replace it with fresh lime putty, watching as the walls gradually returned to their original integrity. You have good touch, Luca observed one afternoon as we worked on the kitchen's main wall. My cousin, he tried this work for 2 years, never get right feeling. You learn in 3 weeks. The compliment meant more than any praise I'd received for expensive design projects in Boston. This wasn't about impressing clients or winning awards, it was about genuinely contributing to something lasting and meaningful. Matilda began teaching me traditional cooking techniques in the evenings, lessons that proved surprisingly relevant to my restoration work. Both required understanding how time, temperature, and patience could transform raw materials into something beautiful and nourishing. Bread like building, she explained as we kneaded dough for the next day's loaves. Must respect process, cannot hurry, must feel when ready. Her kitchen became my second classroom. I learned to make pasta from scratch, rolling the dough until it reached the perfect thickness, cutting it into precise strips that would cook evenly. I mastered the art of preserving vegetables from her garden, understanding how salt and thyme could transform fresh produce into flavors that would last through winter. These skills felt connected in ways I hadn't expected. The patience required for proper fermentation taught me to wait for mortar to cure completely before applying paint. The precision needed for pasta cutting translated to measuring tile spacing. The attention to texture and consistency that made good bread helped me judge when plaster was ready to apply. My hands became my tools in ways they'd never been before. I could judge the consistency of mortar by touch, determine if bread dough was properly kneaded, feel whether a stone was properly seated in a wall. This tactile knowledge felt more reliable than any measurement or instruction manual. "You change," Giuseppe observed one evening, as I helped him close the cafe. "First time I see you, very worried, very, how to say, careful about everything. Now you get dirty. You laugh when make mistake." He was right. The perfectionism that had once paralyzed me, the need to have every detail planned and controlled, had given way to a more experimental approach. When a tile cracked during installation, I no longer saw it as a failure, but as an opportunity to create a more interesting pattern. When my first attempt at fresco restoration left visible brush marks, Salvatore simply handed me finer tools and said, "Try again." The villa was teaching me to embrace imperfection as part of beauty. The slight irregularities in hand-mixed mortar gave the walls character that machine-manufactured materials could never match. The subtle variations in hand-cut tiles created visual interest that perfect uniformity would have lacked. My phone calls with Sarah became increasingly difficult to explain. "You're learning construction work?" she'd ask, bewilderment clear in her voice. "Alicia, you used to get manicures twice a month." "I still could," I'd reply, looking at my stained, call-used hands. "I just don't want to." The truth was more complex. These hands were building something real, something that would outlast any perfect manicure. They were creating a home that truly belonged to me, shaped by my choices and my labor. For the first time in my adult life, I felt genuinely proud of work I'd done with my own hands. November in Monte Croce brought the harvest season, and with it, my first real test of belonging to the community. The villa renovation had slowed to accommodate the town's most important annual ritual, the olive harvest that would determine families' livelihoods for the coming year. "You help us," Giuseppe announced one morning, not really asking. "Villa can wait few days, olives cannot." I found myself assigned to the Benedetti family grove, the same lawyer who'd helped me purchase the villa. His wife Francesca greeted me with mild skepticism as she handed me a traditional olive-picking basket woven from local reeds. "American hands too soft for this work," she said in careful English, but her tone carried more curiosity than criticism. The first day proved her right. Despite months of construction work, the repetitive motion of combing olives from branches left my hands cramped and my back aching in new ways. The other workers, mostly women from the village, moved with practiced efficiency, their conversations flowing in rapid Italian, while I struggled to keep pace with their productivity. But by the second day, something clicked. The rhythm of the work became meditative, my hands finding the right pressure to strip fruit without damaging branches. The women began including me in their conversations, speaking more slowly and patiently correcting my grammar when I attempted to respond in Italian. "Bene, Alicia," Francesca said on the third morning, examining my filled basket. "Yesterday you pick like tourist, today you pick like Pisana, like village woman." The compliment carried weight I was only beginning to understand. These women had worked together for decades, their friendship forged through shared labor and mutual dependence. Being accepted into their rhythm meant more than earning their approval, it meant being trusted with work that mattered. During lunch breaks under the olive trees, I learned about their lives in ways that went far beyond casual conversation. Maria, the baker's wife, was caring for her mother-in-law with dementia while raising 3 teenagers. Julia, who ran the small grocery, was quietly supporting her unemployed brother's family while maintaining the fiction that he was earning his own wages. Anna, the postmistress, had been sending money to her daughter in Rome for years, never mentioning that her own pension barely covered her expenses. These revelations came gradually, woven into discussions about olive quality and weather predictions. The women shared their burdens matter-of-factly, without drama or requests for sympathy. They simply included me in the web of mutual support that held their community together. "Your husband," Maria asked one afternoon, "he never come to see your new house?" The question was inevitable, but I dreaded it nonetheless. In a community where marriages lasted decades, and family ties defined social structure, my situation defied easy explanation. "We're getting divorced," I said simply. He wasn't a good husband." The women exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Anna reached over and patted my hand with fingers stained purple from olive handling. "Some men, they think woman is like furniture," she said. "Pretty to look at, useful to have, but no real value. These men, they learn too late what they lose. Julia nodded emphatically. My first husband, same thinking. I was young, scared to leave. Then one day I wake up and think better alone than with someone who make you feel alone. Their matter-of-fact acceptance of my situation felt revolutionary. No judgment about failed marriage, no suggestions that I should have tried harder or forgiven more. Just acknowledgement that some relationships weren't worth preserving. That evening, the entire harvest crew gathered at the local frontoio, the olive mill, to watch their combined harvest being pressed into oil. The ancient machinery hummed as golden green liquid flowed from the press, filling containers that would sustain families through the winter. Salvatore appeared at my elbow, holding 2 small glasses of the fresh oil. Taste, he instructed. This is what we work for. The oil was unlike anything I'd experienced, peppery, fruity, with a complexity that spoke of soil and sunlight, and generations of careful cultivation. But more than taste, it represented something profound, the product of collective effort, shared knowledge, and mutual trust. In America, I told him, we buy olive oil in supermarkets. I never thought about where it comes from, who makes it. Here, everything connect, he replied. Land to people, people to land, work together, or no work at all. As the mill shut down for the evening, and families collected their allotted shares of oil, I realized I was witnessing something my old life had completely lacked: genuine interdependence. In Boston, I'd been isolated by affluence, cushioned from real connection by the ability to purchase services rather than rely on neighbors. Here, my architectural training helped Benedetti design a more efficient storage system for his oil containers. In return, his legal expertise smoothed complications with my villa's building permits. Matilda taught me to preserve vegetables. I helped her grandson with English homework. Giuseppe shared his cafe's recipes. I contributed design ideas for his expanded seating area. Walking home through the darkened streets, I carried my small container of oil like a trophy. Tomorrow the villa work would resume, but tonight I belonged to something larger than my individual project. I belonged to Monte Croce. By December, the villa had transformed from crumbling ruin into something that resembled a home. The roof no longer leaked, the electrical system met modern safety standards, and most rooms had functioning plumbing. But my savings account told a different story, nearly depleted, with several major expenses still looming. The reality of my financial situation hit me during a cold morning meeting with Benedetti about final building permits. The kitchen renovation permit requires an additional fee, he explained apologetically. New regulations from the regional government. Another €800. €800 I didn't have. My secret account, which had seemed adequate when I'd bought the villa, had been steadily drained by the endless stream of unexpected costs that accompanied any restoration project. The original budget Salvatore and I had calculated had proven wildly optimistic. That evening, sitting in what would eventually become my living room, surrounded by half-finished walls and borrowed furniture, I forced myself to confront the numbers. At my current burn rate, I'd be completely broke within 6 weeks. The villa was livable but far from finished, and I had no income stream to sustain further work. You look worried, Matilda observed when I returned to Giuseppe's house for dinner. They'd insisted I continue staying with them until the villa's heating system was properly installed, a kindness that had become another small weight on my conscience. Money problems, I admitted. The renovation is costing more than I planned. Giuseppe and Matilda exchanged one of their meaningful glances before Matilda disappeared into the kitchen, returning with a manila envelope. We talk about this for weeks, Giuseppe said carefully. You need work. We need help. Maybe partnership. Inside the envelope were architectural drawings, plans for expanding the cafe into the adjacent building, which Giuseppe had quietly purchased 2 years earlier. The sketches were rough but showed potential for doubling their seating capacity and adding a small hotel upstairs. Tourist season coming, Giuseppe explained. More people every year want to stay in small towns, not big cities. But we need someone who understands design, who can make beautiful spaces that respect old buildings. The opportunity was exactly what I needed, but the irony wasn't lost on me. 6 months ago, I'd been married to a successful architect, surrounded by luxury, with access to unlimited resources. Now I was being offered survival through a small-town cafe expansion project. I don't have any money to invest, I said honestly. No need money, Matilda replied firmly. You have skill, we have building. You design, supervise work, we split profit when finished. Over the following days, I threw myself into the project with desperate enthusiasm. The adjacent building was even older than my villa, dating to the 13th century, but structurally sound. The challenge was creating modern amenities while preserving historical character, exactly the kind of problem I'd been learning to solve on my own renovation. Working with Giuseppe on the cafe expansion revealed business skills I'd forgotten I possessed. In my marriage, Damien had handled all financial decisions, leaving me to focus on purely aesthetic concerns. Here, I found myself calculating profit margins, researching supplier costs, and developing realistic timelines that balanced quality with budget constraints. You understand numbers good, Giuseppe observed as we reviewed contractor bids. In America, you do this work before, sort of. I had my own design business, but it was small. My husband always said I wasn't practical enough for the business side. Giuseppe frowned. Husband was wrong. You see problems before they cost money. Very practical. The validation felt profound. Damien had systematically undermined my confidence in my professional abilities, always positioning himself as the practical one, while dismissing my contributions as merely creative. Working with Giuseppe, I rediscovered skills I'd convinced myself I didn't possess. Word of the cafe expansion spread through the village, generating excitement and some unexpected opportunities. The mayor approached me about consulting on the town's tourism development plan. A wealthy Roman who owned a vacation villa asked me to redesign his guest quarters. Even the local church committee inquired about my availability to restore some damaged frescoes in the chapel. You have reputation now, Luca told me, as we installed new windows in the cafe expansion. People say American women who understand old buildings. The work was modest compared to my previous projects, but the satisfaction felt entirely different. Each job strengthened my connection to the community, while building a foundation for genuine financial independence. More importantly, clients treated me as an equal partner in their projects, rather than hired help expected to execute someone else's vision. My first payment from Giuseppe, a modest sum, representing my share of the cafe's increased winter business, felt more valuable than any check I'd received in Boston. This money came from my own labor, my own decisions, my own growing reputation among people who valued my contributions. That night, I sat in my partially finished villa, heating provided by a small wood stove Salvatore had installed, and wrote an email to Sarah. I'm not having a breakdown, I'm having a breakthrough. And for the first time in years I'm earning my own way. The response came quickly. I don't understand what's happening to you, but you sound stronger somehow. Different, but in a good way. She was right, I was different, and I was finally becoming someone I actually liked. January brought snow to Monte Croce, transforming the medieval town into something from a fairy tale. It also brought a proposal that would change everything about my future in Italy. I was reviewing final invoices for the cafe expansion when Giuseppe and Matilda requested a formal meeting in their living room. The gravity of their demeanor immediately put me on alert. This wasn't about choosing paint colors or discussing construction schedules. Alicia, Giuseppe began carefully, we want to make official proposition. Legal partnership for the cafe business. Matilda placed a folder on the coffee table between us. Inside were documents I recognized from my villa purchase, partnership agreements, business registration forms, tax identification papers, all translated into English, all listing my name alongside theirs. The expansion, it worked better than we dream, Giuseppe continued. December profits up 40% from last year. Americans, British, Germans, they all want authentic Italian experience, but with comfort. You understand how to give both. The numbers were impressive. The cafe's transformation from simple local gathering place to boutique destination had attracted exactly the clientele Giuseppe had hoped for, travelers seeking genuine cultural immersion rather than manufactured tourist experiences. My design choices, preserving original frescoes while adding modern conveniences, Creating intimate seating areas that encouraged conversation had struck the perfect balance. But partnership means commitment, Matilda said seriously. Not just work for us, but with us. Long-term commitment. The weight of their offer settled over me as I studied the documents. This wasn't charity or temporary assistance. They were offering me a genuine stake in a successful business, recognition as an equal partner rather than hired help. What about Sophia? I asked. Your daughter in Australia. Shouldn't this business stay in your family? Giuseppe's expression softened. Sophia has good life in Melbourne, good husband, good job. She come visit, yes, but this not her home anymore. He gestured around the room. You choose to be here, you make life here. This make you family. The documents outlined a three-way partnership. Giuseppe and Matilda would retain majority ownership in recognition of their decades building the business, but I would receive a 30% stake in exchange for my design contributions and ongoing management responsibilities. More importantly, the partnership included plans for future expansion, the small hotel upstairs, potential catering services, even a cooking school featuring Matilda's traditional recipes. You think we too old for big dreams, Matilda said with a smile that belied her words. But having you here, seeing what possible, we feel young again. That evening I walked through the snowy streets to my villa, needing space to process their offer. The building that had seemed like such an overwhelming challenge 6 months ago now felt like home, imperfect but beloved, a testament to what patience and commitment could achieve. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Saw Damien at Jennifer's New Year's party. He was with that brunette from his office. They looked very cozy. Just thought you should know. 6 months ago, such news would have devastated me. Now it felt like information about strangers. I tried to summon some emotional response, anger, hurt, even curiosity about what Damien was telling people about our situation. Instead, I felt only a mild sense of closure. The next morning, I found Salvatore already at work in my villa, installing custom shelving in what would become my home office. You decide about Giuseppe's offer, he asked, without preamble. How did you, small town, Giuseppe tell his cousin tell Baker tell everyone? He grinned. Good offer. Smart business. I'm American. I don't know anything about running an Italian business long term. Salvatore set down his tools and looked at me seriously. You know what make good partner, not where you born, but how you work. You listen, you learn, you respect what come before while making better. Giuseppe and Matilda, they choose good. His confidence in me felt like a gift. Over the past months I'd grown to trust his judgment about everything from structural engineering to local politics. If Salvatore believed I belonged here, perhaps I could believe it too. That afternoon, I met with Benedetti to review the partnership documents. This is generous offer, he said after examining the terms. Giuseppe could sell to big hospitality company, make much money now. Instead, he invest in person, in community future. What are the obligations? The risks, standard business partnership risks, but also cultural obligations. You become part of village fabric, not just worker, but stakeholder. People will expect you to participate in community decisions, support local traditions, contribute to collective well-being. The responsibility felt both daunting and appealing. In Boston, I'd lived in carefully maintained isolation, connected to neighbors only through polite nods and property value concerns. Here, partnership meant genuine integration into a web of relationships that extended far beyond business transactions. There's something else, Benedetti added. Partnership makes your residency status much stronger, not just property owner now, but business owner with local employment obligations. Very difficult for government to revoke. That evening, I signed the documents in Giuseppe's kitchen, Matilda serving wine from their personal reserves, while neighbors stopped by to witness the formalization of what everyone already knew. I wasn't leaving Monte I was home. Spring brought an unexpected acceleration to my new career as word of the cafe's transformation spread throughout Tuscany. The first major outside project came through a recommendation from the mayor, a wealthy Milanese family, who'd purchased a crumbling palazzo in the neighboring village of San Gimino. They want someone who understands old buildings but thinks like modern person, the mayor explained as he handed me their contact information. Giuseppe, he tell them you are perfect. The Palazzo project was unlike anything I'd tackled before, a 16th-century mansion that required not just restoration but complete reimagining as a luxury retreat center. The clients, the Rossinis, had made their fortune in fashion and wanted to create a destination that would attract international wellness tourists while respecting the building's historical significance. "We've seen what you did with Giuseppe's Café," Signora Rossini explained during our first meeting, conducted in the Palazzo's cavernous main hall. "The reviews online, they all mention the perfect balance of authentic and comfortable. This is exactly what we need for our vision." Standing in that vast space, with afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and centuries of architectural details surrounding me, I felt the familiar thrill of seeing potential where others saw problems. But this time, I also felt something new: confidence in my ability to deliver results that would satisfy demanding clients while honoring the building's legacy. The project required skills I'd never developed working on suburban homes in Boston. I needed to understand UNESCO heritage regulations, coordinate with multiple levels of government bureaucracy, and work with artisans whose techniques hadn't changed in centuries. More challenging still, I had to translate my vision across language barriers to craftspeople who'd learned their trades through apprenticeships rather than formal education. My months working with Salvatore proved invaluable. The patience I'd developed mixing lime mortar translated to the meticulous planning required for complex structural modifications. The communication skills I'd built explaining design concepts to Giuseppe's Café customers helped me navigate conversations with specialized craftspeople who spoke only regional dialects. "You understand now," Salvatore observed as we reviewed plans for the Palazzo's new spa facilities, "why I say building teach you. Every project, you learn something you need for next project." The Palazzo restoration became my graduate education in European preservation architecture. I learned to source handmade tiles from families who'd operated the same kilns for generations. I discovered how to specify modern HVAC systems that could be completely hidden within historical structures. I mastered the delicate art of installing contemporary lighting that enhanced rather than competed with original frescoes. But the most significant development was learning to manage teams of highly skilled craftspeople who initially viewed me with skepticism. My accent, my gender, and my relatively recent arrival in Italy all worked against me in an industry built on generational relationships and traditional hierarchies. The breakthrough came during a heated discussion about bathroom installations with Romano, the master plumber whose family had been working on prestigious restorations for 4 generations. He'd been dismissing my suggestions for weeks, implementing his own solutions regardless of how they affected the overall design. "Signora," he said, during one particularly tense meeting, "you draw pretty pictures, but I understand how water actually flows in old buildings." Instead of arguing, I picked up his tools and began dismantling the problematic connection he'd just installed. My months of hands-on work at the villa had taught me enough practical plumbing to demonstrate exactly why his approach would cause drainage problems throughout the building. "You see this angle," I said, repositioning the pipes according to my specifications. "Water will pool here during winter, freezing will crack the joints, and we'll have leaks in the walls within 2 years." Romano's expression shifted from condescension to surprise as he examined my work. "You know this how?" "Because I made the same mistake in my own villa. Salvatore made me fix it 3 times until I understood why it was wrong." From that moment, our working relationship transformed. Romano began consulting me on technical decisions instead of simply implementing his preferences. More importantly, word spread among other craftspeople that the American designer wasn't just another wealthy foreigner playing with old buildings. She understood the practical realities of restoration work. The Palazzo project took 8 months to complete, during which I found myself traveling throughout central Italy to source materials and coordinate with specialized artisans. Each trip expanded my network of contacts and deepened my understanding of regional building traditions. "You become real architecta now," observed Franco, the elderly mason who'd carved new stone details to match the Palazzo's original facades. "Not just person who choose colors and arrange furniture, you understand how buildings live, how they breathe, how they age." When the Palazzo officially opened as the Rossini Wellness Retreat, the reviews exceeded everyone's expectations. International design magazines featured the restoration, praising the seamless integration of modern luxury with historical authenticity. More importantly for my future, the articles all prominently credited my work, establishing my reputation beyond the immediate region. The first inquiry from a client in Rome arrived the week after the Palazzo's opening, then another from Florence. Then 3 more from various locations throughout Italy. I was no longer just surviving in my new life, I was thriving. By summer, my life in Monte Croce had developed a rhythm I couldn't have imagined a year earlier. The cafe partnership consumed my mornings, reviewing reservations for the small hotel upstairs, consulting with Matilda on seasonal menu changes, coordinating with local suppliers who'd become genuine friends rather than mere business contacts. Afternoons were dedicated to my growing restoration practice, which now included projects as far away as Bologna and Naples. The transformation wasn't just professional. The woman who'd been abandoned in this town bore little resemblance to the person I'd become. My hands, once soft and carefully manicured for client meetings, now bore the honest calluses of someone who understood buildings from the inside out. My wardrobe had evolved from designer pieces to practical clothes that could transition from construction sites to business meetings without embarrassment. Most significantly, my social world had expanded in ways that felt both foreign and natural. In Boston, my friendships had been carefully curated around Damien's preferences and social ambitions. Here, relationships developed organically through shared work and mutual dependence. "You come to my daughter's wedding next month?" asked Francesca, the realtor who'd sold me the villa, as we reviewed contracts for another restoration project. "She specifically requests you on guest list." The invitation represented a milestone I hadn't recognized reaching. Wedding guest lists in small Italian towns weren't casual affairs, they reflected genuine community belonging. Being included meant I'd crossed some invisible threshold from outsider to neighbor. The wedding preparation revealed how thoroughly I'd integrated into the village's social fabric. Matilda enlisted my help designing table arrangements that would accommodate complex family dynamics spanning 3 generations. Giuseppe asked me to coordinate with the photographer, leveraging my design background to ensure the reception venue looked its best. Even the bride sought my advice on modernizing her grandmother's traditional dress without losing its essential character. "You have good eye for what honors past while embracing future," she told me during one of our consultation sessions. "This is what I want for my marriage, respect for tradition but freedom to make it our own." Her words resonated deeply as I reflected on my own journey. The life I was building honored my past experience while embracing possibilities I'd never considered. The design skills I'd developed in Boston had evolved into something richer and more meaningful. The relationship patterns I'd learned in marriage had been replaced by healthier dynamics, based on mutual respect and genuine partnership. My villa had become a testament to this integration of old and new. The restored frescoes shared wall space with contemporary lighting. I designed specifically for the space. Antique furniture I'd discovered in local markets mixed comfortably with modern pieces I'd commissioned from regional artisans. The result felt authentically mine in ways my perfectly coordinated Boston home never had. Evening gatherings at the villa had become semi-regular events that drew an eclectic mix of locals and visitors. Salvatore might bring his wife to share stories of their recent trip to visit his daughter in Berlin. Giuseppe and Matilda would arrive with fresh bread and local wine. Younger villagers would stop by to practice English or seek advice about career decisions. These gatherings felt like the antithesis of the dinner parties I'd hosted during my marriage, events carefully choreographed to advance Damien's professional relationships and social status. Here, conversations meandered naturally from local politics to travel experiences to philosophical discussions about work and meaning. People came, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "Your house, it has good energy," observed Dr. Martinelli, the village physician, during one particularly memorable evening that had extended well past midnight. "People feel comfortable here, feel like they can be themselves." The observation struck me as profoundly meaningful. Creating spaces where people felt comfortable being themselves had become my unconscious specialty, perhaps because I was finally comfortable with who I was becoming. My communication with the outside world had dwindled to essential contacts. Sarah still called occasionally, though our conversations had grown increasingly strained as my new life became harder to explain or relate to her urban American experience. My few remaining Boston acquaintances had stopped reaching out entirely, perhaps sensing that I'd moved beyond their ability to understand or advise. The isolation from my former life felt liberating rather than lonely. The energy I'd once spent maintaining relationships based on geographical proximity or social obligation was now channeled into connections that felt genuinely nourishing. One evening, as I sat on my villa's terrace, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and amber, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Sonia. I think we should talk. Damien doesn't know I'm contacting you." The message felt like a voice from another world, a reminder that somewhere across the ocean, the life I'd left behind was continuing its own evolution. But as I looked around at the home I'd created, at the community that had embraced me, at the work that fulfilled me in ways I'd never experienced, I realized something profound. I no longer cared what was happening in that other world. This was my world now, and I was exactly where I belonged. Sonia's text message sat unread on my phone for 3 days while I debated whether to respond. The woman my husband had chosen over me, the reason behind his elaborate scheme to discard me in Italy, wanted to talk. Part of me was curious, what could she possibly have to say that would matter to me now? But a larger part recognized the text for what it was, a potential intrusion of my abandoned past into the peaceful present I'd built. I finally opened the message thread while sitting in the cafe during the quiet afternoon lull, surrounded by the comfortable sounds of Matilda preparing dinner and Giuseppe reviewing supplier invoices. "I know this must be strange hearing from me, but I have information you need to know. Damien has been lying to everyone, including me. Can we talk privately? It's important." The follow-up messages revealed more. "He told me you had a breakdown and disappeared. I just found out he abandoned you intentionally. I'm horrified. And finally, he's planning something. Coming to Italy next week. Says he's going to sort out this ridiculous situations once and for all." My blood ran cold at the final message. Damien was coming here, to my town, my sanctuary, the place where I'd rebuilt myself from nothing. The audacity of it staggered me. After a year of silence, he thought he could simply arrive and sort out my life according to his preferences. I showed the messages to Giuseppe, whose face darkened as Marco translated the English for him. "He think he can come here and take you back." Giuseppe's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "Like you are possession he left in hotel." "I don't know what he's thinking," I admitted. "Maybe the divorce papers haven't been processed yet. Maybe he's finally realizing what leaving me here actually cost him." Matilda emerged from the kitchen, clearly having overheard our conversation. She spoke rapidly in Italian, her tone sharp and determined. Marco translated with obvious amusement. "Nana says if this man comes to our town thinking he can disturb your peace, he will discover that Italian grandmothers are not as helpless as American wives." Despite my anxiety, I laughed. The image of Matilda facing down Damien was both absurd and oddly comforting. But the reality remained serious. I needed to prepare for a confrontation I'd hoped never to face. That evening, I called Benedetti to discuss my legal position. "Your residency status is completely secure," he assured me. "Business partnership, property ownership, established community ties. No one can force you to leave Italy. But if your husband arrives with divorce papers claiming abandonment or mental incompetence, could he cause problems for my business partnerships?" "Possibly, if he can demonstrate financial claims on your activities here." "Did you use any marital assets for your Italian investments?" The question highlighted a vulnerability I'd tried not to think about. My grandmother's inheritance had technically been mine alone, but if Damien wanted to argue that our joint assets had supported me while I spent that money, things could become complicated. I decided to respond to Sonia's messages, arranging a video call for the following morning. When her face appeared on my laptop screen, I was struck by how young she looked, easily 10 years younger than me, with the kind of polished beauty that Damien had always admired. "I'm sorry," were her first words. "I know this is awkward, but I had to warn you." Damien. He's not the man I thought he was. The story she told was both familiar and shocking. Damien had painted my disappearance as a mental breakdown triggered by his attempt to save our marriage. According to his version, I'd become increasingly unstable and paranoid, accusing him of affairs he'd never had, and had finally snapped during our anniversary trip. He showed me texts that made you seem unhinged, Sonia admitted. Screenshots of messages where you were accusing him of things, making demands. I believed him when he said you'd run away to punish him. What changed your mind? I found the real text thread on his computer. The messages he showed me were edited. He deleted his parts of the conversations, all the gaslighting, the manipulation, the cruel responses. The woman in those real messages wasn't crazy. She was desperate to save her marriage from a man who was systematically destroying it. My hands trembled slightly as she continued. Damien had been planning my discarding for months, documenting what he could frame as evidence of my instability while building his case for a divorce that would leave me with minimal assets. He's been telling people you had a breakdown and disappeared somewhere in Europe. He's gotten a lot of sympathy for being the patient husband of a mentally ill wife. But now, she paused, now he's found out about your business, your villa, your new life. He's furious that you're not broken and desperate like he expected. What exactly is he planning? He's flying to Rome next week, then driving to your town. He has some kind of document from his lawyer claiming you're not competent to make legal decisions. He thinks if he can prove you're living in poverty or under duress, he can force you to return for proper psychiatric care. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. Damien couldn't accept that I'd thrived without him, so he was creating a narrative where my success was actually evidence of mental illness. But as I looked around my villa, at the life I'd built through my own choices and efforts, I realized something crucial. I was no longer the woman he could manipulate and control. He was about to discover exactly how much I'd changed. Damien arrived on a Tuesday morning in August, driving a rented Mercedes through Montecroce's narrow medieval streets like he owned them. I watched from the cafe's upstairs window as he parked illegally in the main piazza, ignoring the obvious irritation of locals who had to navigate around his oversized vehicle. He looked exactly as I remembered, impeccably dressed even for travel, designer sunglasses, that confident stride that had once impressed me, but now seemed merely arrogant. But something was different too. The easy charm that had carried him through decades of social and professional situations appeared forced, his movements slightly too quick, too aggressive. Giuseppe appeared at my elbow, coffee cup in hand. "This is him, that's him. Smaller than I expected," Giuseppe observed dryly. I'd spent the past week preparing for this moment with the methodical approach I'd learned from months of restoration work. All my legal documents were organized and ready. Benedetti had prepared responses to any claims Damien might make about my mental state or financial situation. Most importantly, I'd gathered evidence of my own, business records, tax documents, testimonials from clients and community members, who could speak to my competence and stability. Damien's first stop was obvious, the local police station, where he would undoubtedly attempt to file some kind of report about his missing wife. I imagined him explaining to the bemused officers that I needed to be rescued from my own choices, that my success in building a new life was actually evidence of mental illness. 20 minutes later, he emerged from the station looking less confident. The police had clearly not been as receptive to his concerns as he'd expected. His next stop was equally predictable, the cafe, where any visitor to Montecroce eventually ended up. I was behind the counter when he entered, reviewing inventory sheets with studied casualness. The transformation in his expression when he saw me was almost comical, shock giving way to confusion, then something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Alicia," his voice carried that tone of patient authority I remembered so well. "We need to talk." "Hello, Damien. Would you like an espresso?" The mundane offer clearly wasn't the response he'd expected. He glanced around the bustling cafe, taking in the obvious prosperity and professional atmosphere. This wasn't the desperate hiding place he'd anticipated finding. "Privately," he said firmly. "This is serious. I'm working, but I can take a break in 15 minutes. I continued checking inventory, not looking up. There's a table on the terrace if you'd like to wait. His jaw tightened at being managed rather than obeyed, but he accepted the offered seat outside. Through the window, I watched him examine the cafe's exterior renovations, the carefully designed outdoor seating area, the small but obvious signs of successful business operation. Giuseppe materialized beside me. You want me to stay close? No, but thank you. I need to handle this myself. When I finally joined Damien on the terrace, carrying 2 espressos and a plate of Matilda's biscotti, his opening gambit was classic manipulation disguised as concern. Alicia, I know you're angry with me, and you have every right to be, but this fantasy you're living, playing at being Italian, pretending you can build a life here, it's not sustainable. You need help. What kind of help? I asked calmly, sipping my coffee. Professional help. The kind that deals with trauma and psychological breaks from reality. He leaned forward, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd heard 1,000 times. Abandoning your entire life, your home, your marriage over a simple misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. I interrupted. You mean your affair with Sonia? His face went pale. She contacted you. Whatever she said, she told me the truth. About the edited text messages. About your plan to frame me as mentally unstable, about the months of manipulation designed to make me doubt my own sanity. For the first time since his arrival, Damien looked genuinely rattled. You don't understand the context. Yes, Sonia and I developed feelings for each other, but only because our marriage was already failing. You'd become paranoid, controlling. Stop. The word came out with quiet authority that surprised us both. I spent 12 years accepting your version of reality, making myself smaller to accommodate your comfort. I'm not doing that anymore. I pulled out my phone and showed him the photos he'd stored in our shared cloud account, images of him with Sonia dating back nearly 2 years, text conversations, planning their relationship while orchestrating my humiliation. You documented your own betrayal, Damien. Every lie, every manipulation, every moment you made me feel crazy for noticing what was actually happening. His expression shifted from manipulation to anger, the mask finally dropping. Fine, so I made mistakes. But look at you now, Alicia. Look at this place. He gestured dismissively at the thriving cafe around us. You're playing house in some medieval village pretending to be someone you're not. This isn't a life. It's an extended vacation from reality. I stood up, finished with this conversation. You're right that I'm not the same person you married. That woman died when you abandoned her in Italy. The woman I am now built this life through her own choices, her own work, her own relationships, and she doesn't need your permission to exist. Damien stood too, his voice rising. You can't just disappear from your real life because you're having a midlife crisis. My real life is here, I said firmly. My business, my home, my community. Everything I built without you. He stared at me, finally beginning to understand that I wasn't the broken woman he'd expected to collect. I was someone entirely new. The final phase of our confrontation moved to my villa, where Damien insisted on seeing what I'd actually accomplished with what he still assumed was marital property. I led him through the narrow streets of Monte Croce, past neighbors who nodded warmly to me and regarded him with polite curiosity. The villa's transformation spoke for itself. From the restored medieval entrance to the carefully preserved frescoes now perfectly illuminated by custom lighting, every detail reflected months of thoughtful work and genuine care. The space breathed with life, comfortable furniture arranged for both solitude and entertaining modern amenities, seamlessly integrated with historical features, rooms that felt both elegant and genuinely livable. Damien moved through the space in silence, his expression shifting from skepticism to grudging appreciation to something that looked like genuine surprise. This wasn't the desperate hideaway he'd expected to find, but a home that reflected sophisticated taste and considerable investment. How much did all this cost? He finally asked, his architect's eye calculating the scope of renovation. Every penny of my grandmother's inheritance, plus what I've earned here. Grandma Rose's money, his voice sharpened. That was supposed to be our retirement security. It was my inheritance, Damien. The only thing in our entire marriage that was truly mine. I moved to the kitchen window, looking out over the valley that had become my view. You never even asked what I wanted to do with it. He followed me, and for the first time since his arrival, his voice carried something other than manipulation or anger. Alicia, I came here to bring you home, to fix what went wrong between us. What went wrong is that you fell in love with someone else, and decided the easiest way to handle it was to make me disappear. I made a mistake, you made a choice. Multiple choices, over many months. I turned to face him directly. You chose to have an affair. You chose to gaslight me when I suspected. You chose to abandon me in a foreign country, rather than have an honest conversation about wanting a divorce. The fight seemed to drain out of him as he sank into one of my kitchen chairs. I thought you'd call your parents, fly home upset but manageable. We'd have a big fight, maybe some therapy, but eventually we'd work it out on my terms. Your terms, I repeated. Where I'd be grateful enough for your forgiveness to never mention Sonia again. Where I'd accept whatever arrangement you offered rather than risk being alone. He nodded slowly, perhaps finally understanding the scope of his miscalculation. I never imagined you'd this, he gestured around the villa, because you never saw me as capable of building anything independently. I was an accessory to your success, not a partner in creating something together. We sat in silence for several minutes before he spoke again. The divorce papers Benedetti filed, they're fair, more than fair, actually. You're not asking for alimony, or part of the firm. I don't want anything from my old life, Damien. This isn't about punishing you, it's about freeing both of us to become who we're supposed to be. He pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. Sonia's been calling all morning. She's worried I'd try to force you back. Maybe do something that would destroy what you've built here. She loves you, I said simply. The real you, not the version you constructed for our marriage. Let her. As the afternoon sun slanted through my windows, casting golden light across the frescoes that had survived 5 centuries of change, Damien signed the final divorce papers on my kitchen table. No drama, no last-minute appeals, just the quiet conclusion of a chapter that had ended long before either of us was willing to admit it. When he left that evening, driving back toward Rome and his flight to Boston, I felt not triumph but profound relief. The woman he'd abandoned in Monocrosis was finally officially free to become whoever she chose to be. I chose to be Alicia Benedetti, partner in Café Monocrosa, restoration architect, and permanent resident of a medieval town that had taught me the difference between surviving and thriving. I chose to be home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.